Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. When I was in my addiction, and even during the first part of my recovery, one of the biggest issues that I had was that I would encounter periods of intense stress brought on by these overwhelming to-do lists that I had. And lists full of things that I had written down either for work or for life outside of work that were things that I felt that I needed to do, that had to get done, and I didn't have any idea how I was going to accomplish it all. In fact, some of my worst moments in my addiction came during times where I had these lists of dozens of things that all seemed like they had to be done at that very moment, and yet I couldn't figure out which one to do first. The overwhelming stress brought on by that would send me into this anxious spiral that I felt the only way to solve was by turning to the bottle or the bong or even a pill. And so it's a phenomenon that I've been trying to fight in my recovery, and I want to read a little bit about what Annie Grace has to say about it in This Naked Mind. She says, and this comes up in a section where she's describing part of the alcohol cycle and how the cycle works, and summarizing some of what Alan Carr has said in his books about this. And she says, small daily problems that shouldn't be much of an issue become an ever-increasing mountain of the unachievable. While the initial issues are not necessarily related to drinking, we would have dealt with them, improving upon or solving them rather than feeling overwhelmed, reaching for a drink, and putting them off until tomorrow. Without alcohol, we would be able to handle them as they arose rather than putting them off and making them worse. Now, this really nicely describes the problem that I often found myself in. I felt that when something came up that I needed to do, it was better for me to write it down and then move on with whatever I was doing at the time than to get that thing done. And what would happen is that I would spend a lot of time writing things down that I needed to do and less time actually doing them. This would result in these huge lists of things I needed to do, and there would be times, especially at work, where these lists got so long that I would have to come up with two lists, and one would be things I had to get done that day, and one would be things that could wait. And some of these things that I put on the list at a point where I could have just done them at that time ended up moving to the this can be done later list, and finally just deleted from the list altogether, because at some point the problem either went away or wasn't something I had to deal with in the first place, or because I finally had to take some kind of action because I had put it off for so long. And then I had all this stress managing these lists of things to do. I could spend hours looking through these things and trying to figure out, okay, how do I organize this so I can best get my work done, instead of just doing what was in front of me when it happened. And even in my personal life, I would end up with these long lists of things to do, and I wrote down everything that I had to do, every little thing that I had to do, and it got overwhelming. Instead of just actually doing, I felt like having these lists gave me a sense of control. And my classic response to having something come up that I needed to take care of, let's say it was unloading the dishwasher, for example. A minor thing happens to everybody. I would realize, hey, I need to unload the dishwasher, and my response would be, okay, I will do that, but first I'm going to have a drink. And so I would use alcohol and drugs, and then it would compound the problems because all of a sudden I have less time to get the work done. I have less time to do the things that are sitting in front of me, and the list just keeps growing and growing. And I end up looking at these to-do lists that are just insurmountable. Like, how am I ever going to get this stuff done? And that causes more stress. And when the mind is presented with an overwhelming amount of stimuli, when you have, for example, a list of 3 things in front of you, then it's easy to pick which one needs to get done first. But when you have a list of 20 things, it's a lot more difficult to prioritize. And for this addict, when I had a list of 20 things and I couldn't decide which one needed to be done first, my classic response was, let me go have a drink and I'll figure it out after that. Maybe some thinking juice will help me figure this out. Of course, it always compounded the problem because then I was trying to evaluate the things I had to do with a muddled mind that really couldn't prioritize very well, and it made it even more difficult to handle what was right in front of me. So in recovery, I've really been trying to focus on doing things as they come up, especially the little things, because what I found is that I will allow the little things to slide and say, I'll handle that later. And then all of a sudden, I've got this little pile of stuff I've got to deal with. And I start to feel kind of overwhelmed and I'm not sure what to do first. And I start going back to making these pretty intense lists. But if I just do what comes to mind when it comes to mind, most of the time that ends up being the right thing to do, because then I can take care of whatever comes to mind, get it off my plate, and then move on to the next thing. And that has allowed me to avoid the situation where I overwhelm myself with things that with big lists of stuff that I have to get done. It's also allowed me to declutter my life a little bit so that I don't put myself in situations where all of a sudden I look around me and all I see are things that have to be done. Now, there's going to be times in life where it's unavoidable. You're going to encounter situations where you just got so much to do and only so much time to do it. And, that's unavoidable. And at that point, you just decide what's the next right thing to do and move forward with it and have some faith that the rest of it will work out as long as you keep putting one foot in front of the other. But I can tell you those times have been drastically reduced for me since I started just trying to do things as they came up rather than putting them on lists and prioritizing them and trying to maintain ultimate control over what I have to do. So that is one way to avoid these situations where you end up with what she calls in the book an ever-increasing mountain of the unachievable. If you constantly allow yourself to take little steps as they come up, then the mountain becomes a hill, and you can climb hills much easier than you can climb mountains. That's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow with more. Have a good one.